My name is Julie Ty. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. We hope you and your families are staying safe and healthy during these challenging times. Westchester and Rockland counties face environmental issues on a daily basis, from unreliable public transit to aging infrastructure, access to renewable energy and clean transportation, to protecting water quality. Luckily, this district has been well served with longtime Congressmember Nita Lowey. As chair of the Appropriations Committee, she fought for important federal investments in environmental protection. One of her priorities is permanently and fully funding the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which allocates investments towards public lands like parks, trails, and playgrounds, and she's been a champion for improving water quality in Long Island Sound. We hope the next Congress member for this district continues to keep the environment a top priority. And that's why we're holding this forum tonight. We want to make sure the environment is top of mind for candidates and voters. It's especially fitting that we're holding this forum the day after Earth Day, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, when Americans really began to recognize the importance of clean air and clean water for healthy communities. Our mission at the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We give voters information about climate and sustainability issues, and we encourage New Yorkers to hold candidates accountable to their promises on fighting climate change and protecting public health from air and water pollution. So thank you again for all being here. You're helping us send a message that New Yorkers care about having a healthy environment, a livable climate for future generations, and are paying attention to this primary. I want to thank especially our valuable partners who helped spread the word about this forum. Scenic Hudson, Croton 100, Climate Reality Project, and Riverkeeper, as well as the organization our moderator works for, Politico New York. We will work together on environmental issues, continuing as we go forward. Because this is a virtual forum, let me go over some ground rules before we start. You in the audience all have your sound muted so as not to disturb the flow. We recommend that you watch the forum in speaker view instead of gallery view so that you can better see the person who's speaking. We're going to start with 1 minute opening statements for each candidate. Our moderator will then proceed with some questions. We'll throw in a round or two of lightning questions where there should be yes or no type answers, the emphasis being on short answers. We'll end with audience questions. So please make sure to submit your question through the chat feature on the screen marked questions before 6:30. I'll probably remind you about that later if we haven't gotten questions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator. Danielle Moyo is an energy and environment reporter for Politico New York. Before joining Politico, she was a Tesla beat reporter for Business Insider, covering innovations in transportation and energy. Her work has been syndicated by Slate, Yahoo News, MSN, and the Boston Globe. She graduated from Duke University, where she was editor-in-chief of the student paper, and we'll forgive her because I'm a Syracuse fan and we don't like Duke. So welcome, Danielle, and thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Just to echo what Julie said, I do hope everyone's doing well out there. I know these are some weird times, but hopefully we'll get through them soon. So like Julie said, I have the best privilege at Politico. I get to cover energy and the environment, and that mostly means I get to go on rants about waste on a daily basis. And Julie can definitely attest to that because we talked about it pretty much every day this week. So basically, yeah, my job is fun. I get to ask all of you questions. I'm going to be keeping an eye on time with Angela. My hope is not to have to cut anyone off, so I just ask that you're mindful of keeping an eye out, and I think this way we'll have a really nice, wide-ranging discussion on a lot of topics. So I think we should just dive right in. So to begin, we're going to start with some opening statements. I promise not to go, by the way, in the same order every single time, but to begin, I'm hoping to do alphabetical. So let's start with David Buchwald. David Carlucci will follow, and then Asha Castleberry Hernandez will go after that, and we'll go from there. So please give your opening statements, keep it to 1 minute, and thank you, David Buchwald. Let's begin.
Thank you, Danielle, and since I married a Duke grad, I don't expect any favoritism, but good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the New York League Conservation Voters Education Fund for coordinating this forum with the co-sponsors, Scenic Hudson, Croton 100, the Climate Reality Project, and Riverkeeper. I have had the honor of representing 9 towns and 132,000 residents of Westchester County for the last 7.5 years. And I've also had the honor in each of my runs for re-election to the State Assembly to be endorsed by the New York League of Conservation Voters. I think that's in part because every year of the state legislative session, I've had a 100% environmental voting record, fighting for issues that I think many of us on this video, but more importantly, many residents of Lower Hudson Valley truly believe in, making sure we have a clean economy, that we're dealing with climate change and making sure that pollution is under control and limited as much as possible. I'm a big believer that we need to apply methods of science. I was a physics major in college. I was someone who's a champion of mass transit well before I was involved in public office. I was a member and then chairman of the Metro North Area Commuter Council. I'm somebody who believes that the environment is something that we need to prioritize in Congress. That's why I'm running to represent you, succeed our Councilor Anita Lowy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Let's go to David Carlucci.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for hosting us tonight. I want to thank all the candidates for being here tonight. The environment is one of the most important things that we could be talking about. I, too, have been honored to have a 100% voting record from the League of Conservation Voters and to have their endorsement in the past. To be able to co-sponsor important legislation like the Climate Leadership and Protection Act, to the Green Amendment. These are important pieces of legislation that I look forward to transferring that experience and bringing it to Washington. I think now that we've experienced a crisis on our hands with COVID-19, I think it's a wake-up call to society, to our nation, that the next crisis, we're in the midst of it, that climate change is going to be the next crisis. And we're already seeing hazardous situations right in Rockland County, in the village of Piermont. Now on a frequent basis, the Hudson River floods. And we're going to see more and more of that. So we have to make sure that from our federal government all the way to the lowest levels of government are all in sync, working together to push back, to mitigate the effects of climate change, to push back against the harm that's been done for decades, and to make sure that we're resilient. And look forward to the debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Asha, could you please take it from here?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the environmental forum. I want to just bless everyone who has lost someone from the coronavirus or coronavirus pandemic. Just on the heels of the 50th Earth Day, our nation is in peril. In order to save our planet, we need to do a better job as a nation. Our planet is in the dire straits of the environment, from air to water to land, and we have been dealing with ongoing issues. It hurts me to the core to read the horrific statistics of cases versus deaths from the coronavirus. And also, I emphatically support the Green New Deal overall. So we must move away from fossil fuels to save our environment and to optimize our energy resources and economy for the 21st century. So as a mother, professor, combat veteran, national security expert, I pledge as the next congressional representative to use all my talents and expertise to continue and to make this planet a beneficiary from the coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to go to Evelyn Farkas, and just so everyone knows who's on deck, we'll then have Allison Fine and Mondaire Jones. So Evelyn, do you want to take it from here? Evelyn, are you there?
For sponsoring this. Oh, am I muted?
You were muted, but there, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Okay, let me start. Start the clock again. So thank you very much to LCV, to Hudson River Keeper, to Croton 100, to Politico, and am I leaving someone out? River Keeper, Scenic Hudson and River Keeper, for sponsoring this. I am running to protect the American dream. We cannot achieve the American dream if we don't address the climate crisis. It's the #1 issue in my plank because the earth is on fire and literally melting. I am a 30-year professional working in the field of national security. The issue of environmental change and climate change has been a thread running throughout my career. It's been ever present, and for those of us in the national security community, we were very well aware of it, probably far before the rest of the public was. I'm running in this race as somebody who has already drafted and passed legislation at the federal level for 7 years when I worked on the Senate Armed Services Committee as a senior staffer. I'm running as somebody who has managed crises in the White House Situation Room for President Obama, and someone who was executive director of the WMD Commission, which among other things, issued recommendations on pandemics. So I'm ready on day one to take all of my expertise and to put it to use in implementing the vision of a Green New Deal. And that's the first piece of legislation that I aim to introduce into Congress, starting very much at its core with the transfer from fossil fuel to renewable energy and an infrastructure plan.
Thank you. Everyone's doing great on time, by the way. Just wanted to throw that out there. So now let's go to Allison Fine.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I grew up in the river towns and raised my 3 children here, and I'm a passionate environmentalist. I'm an experienced and successful innovator in the areas of technology and social justice, and a leader both locally and nationally. More than anything, this crisis has revealed the broken places in our society. The animating issues for my campaign were job insecurity and the lack of benefits, inequality for women, lack of access to healthcare, and the desperate need for tech reform. And the crisis has shown all of this to be true. On Earth Day, I recommended that we pivot the EPA, to become the Department of Ecological Stewardship. This is based on what's called a one world, one health approach. The climate change is intersectional. It's across states, it's across nations. We need to focus on the issues of air pollution and carbon, biodiversity, sustainability, resilience. I know how to make big changes like that. I want us to become a people-centered society and move to the next chapter in our history. Thank you.
Thank you. Mondaire Jones.
I want to echo what my colleagues have said about being so grateful for the opportunity to appear here today and to talk about something that is so important. In fact, it is existential. And many of you who have listened to me speak before know that I am running for Congress because for me, policy is personal. Well, in the context of the environment, as we face climate catastrophe, specifically, that means that for me, I have a stake in the future of this planet. And it is my #1 priority to make sure that we avert climate catastrophe. And I know it is for so many people who are supporting me, many of whom can't even vote, but who are organizing around my campaign because they understand that I have the most ambitious climate agenda of any of the candidates running. I support a Green New Deal, and I'm full-throated about that. I think that the time has passed for modest proposals like market incentives, but rather we need to do things like federal mandates. Mandate the end to the exportation of crude oil, to the development of fossil fuel infrastructure, to making sure that there is no more fracking that goes on in this country. And we have to, of course, re-enter the Paris Climate Accords and do something about the transportation sector that is the single biggest contributor to carbon emissions. And so that means more light rail like what we used to see in Austin and Peekskill, and in Rockland County, a 1-seat train into Manhattan so that we can wean people off of their reliance on automobiles.
Thanks, Mondaire. So now we'll have our final 2 candidates give opening statements and then go to questions. So it'll be Catherine Parker and Adam Schleifer. So let's start with Catherine Parker, please.
Hi, good to see everyone. So for me, I think the climate crisis is very personal. When I first came into office as an elected official, I had told my children that I was going to leave one legacy as, for them and also for constituents, that we would have a better environment. And as a city councilwoman, I worked on a leaf blower ban and a plastic bag ban, so I kept my promise there. When I got to the County Board of Legislators, I worked on creating legislation for an Office of Sustainability and created the position of Energy Director, and I kept my promise there. When we look at the nation, we see so much at the federal level to help combat climate change. And I've been known to say we need to take this on as a war. Now, looking at it in times of the coronavirus times, we see what that looks like, because we're fighting this virus like the enemy, so that we know that we can have our Army work with us and the Army green infrastructure. We know that we can partner with the private sector in order to fund and make these things happen. So we can take it on. We can fight it like a real war.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, I like your visitor, Angela. So now let's conclude with Adam Schleifer's opening statement.
Is he on mute?
Are you on mute?
You're muted.
Sorry. Let me try that again. Thank you all for joining me. This is a great testament to the power of democracy and how important it is and how devoted all of you are to doing this, notwithstanding these difficulties. That's a great testament to that. So the basic question that I think needs to motivate anyone seeking public office and anyone who's a responsible citizen is, how does one act as a good ancestor? How do we ensure that we are leaving our children and our children's children and so on a healthy and habitable planet? And I think that question and the answer inspired me to leave the greatest job I've ever had as a federal prosecutor, where I took on a conspiracy to violate the Clean Air Act, where I helped prosecute the trafficking of endangered species, where I indicted an arson directed at burning down Joshua Tree National Park, one of our great national treasures. I left that job, and the greatest job I ever had, because I knew that we needed to do more to save our planet. And that starts with a carbon tax of at least $40 per metric ton. It includes a national service plan that has a green infrastructure core, service in which entitles its participants to get free higher education, and it includes restoring science and data-driven thinking to our federal government and rejoining the Paris Accords and protecting our federal lands. This isn't just language for me. This is what motivates me. It's what I've done in my entire life, and that's why I was endorsed this week by Michael Gerard, the professor of climate change law and Earth Institute at Columbia University.
Thanks so much. So now we're going to move to our first set of questions. And like your opening statements, these will be a minute each. So I promised I'd switch things up. So we're going to begin with Evelyn Farkas, followed by Allison Fine and Mondaire Jones. And so the first question is, do you support the Land and Water Conservation Fund? And for those who are watching who may not be familiar, this fund is a federal program designed to provide funding for the acquisition and easements of land to benefit Americans. So Evelyn, can you kick us off and tell us, do you support the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
Yeah, so I absolutely support the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And more to the point, in order to demonstrate that I support it, I believe it should be fully funded and not rated for other purposes, because the primary problem with the Land and Water Conservation Fund is that it's been rated for other purposes. And so we need to make sure that it's replenished and that there's sufficient funds in there and they're not diverted for other purposes.
Thank you. All right, Allison?
I absolutely support the Land and Conservation Fund. It's been a fundamental part of American public life for over 100 years, to be supporting our national parks and our open spaces. We're also going to have opportunities in the next few years as we think about remaking our downtowns after this crisis, after we see what's left of retail, to think about opening up even more green spaces and reforesting places where we can.
Great, thank you. And now Mondaire Jones.
Absolutely, I do. I think it is very critical that government, as it has done with respect to this fund, step in and do its job in terms of acquiring key pieces of our land to make sure that we can preserve those things, as well as water, which obviously is essential to human life. We need to make sure that we are preventing private industry from continuing to erode the things that we once just took for granted and I think are increasingly under threat today. And we have to fully fund it, as my colleagues have said. That is something that is unfortunately grossly underfunded today. And so we have to make sure that we prioritize this. It starts with getting a new president of the United States and a better Congress, I think, who understands the urgency of this time in our global history. And that's what I'm fighting to do.
Great, thank you. So now let's move over to Catherine Parker, and she'll be followed by Adam Schleifer and David Buchwald. So Catherine?
Yes, absolutely. I support it. And on a local level, I've worked on issues related to protecting our clean water and creating more green space. But on the federal level, I think one of the things that we have sort of talked a little bit about, but not really jumped into, is the fact that in, you know, where we're at right now as a country, we are seeing places like Grand Escalante out in Utah, which is part of the national park system, was done under President Clinton. And we're seeing that that's been now given drilling rights to and mining rights to the private sector. And we know that offshore drilling for oil, again, our waters are at risk. So we have to protect in every way, shape, and form that we are not funding any of that, that we are protecting our lands, and that we are seeing that renewable energy is actually where we're putting any resources that we have.
Great, thank you. And just to repeat the question for folks who might just be tuning in, do you support the Land and Water Conservation Fund? Adam Schleifer is next.
Sorry, there I go. I think what my colleagues respectfully have failed to mention so far is the source of the funds for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is in fact offshore drilling. So everyone who says they love this fund should be aware of where that money is really coming from. If I had my way, we wouldn't be doing any offshore drilling. What we'd be doing instead is taxing the heck out of fossil fuel emitters through the carbon tax that every serious scholar, including Professor Michael Gerard, who again just endorsed me from Columbia University as an expert in this, says we need to be doing. We'd make up the shortfall. We'd have those funds that's dedicated. I'd also say that Catherine Parker, I'm glad you mentioned Grand Escalante, because as some folks here know, I'm a two-time alumnus of the Boulder Outdoor Survival School, which operates almost exclusively in that federal land. And it's a very proud thing in my background, something I support philanthropically. And I invite everyone who can to go out there and give it a shot. You learn some great things about how to respect nature by being out in the lands that we have. And I will do everything in my power when I'm in Congress next year, hopefully, to stop the exploitation of that and other federal lands from federal drilling and other destructive practices. Thank you.
Great. All right, so now we're going to move to David Buchwald. Do you support the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
As someone who's co-sponsor of New York's ban on offshore drilling in response to the Trump administration's attempt to roll back those rules, I believe we can both fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund and make sure that we protect our environment at the same time when it comes to the revenue. That's what we do here in New York. We have historic funding for the Environmental Protection Fund this November. New Yorkers will be able to vote on an Environmental Bond Act. But fundamentally, this is something that's crucial to the Lower Hudson Valley. You know, we're in the National River Valley National Heritage Area. We have to make sure that we're making sure funds come to promote the natural beauty of our resources. But also, I do think it's important that there be facts in this debate. So, Senator Carlucci, you do not have a 100% environmental voting record. From the League Conservation Voters in 2018, it was 92. 92 is not bad, but it's not 100. Before the League had its own scorecard, another group, the first few years, your ratings were 63, 35, and 59, are short of 100%. I'm sorry, sir, but I have a true 100% environmental voting record in the state legislature. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, I am going to allow David Carlucci to respond to that. So let's give him a minute.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate the information there. I have had a 100% voting record in the most recent category for the New York League of Conservation Voters. And when it comes to the issue of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, I too am concerned of where the funding comes from in offshore drilling. And I have been a co-sponsor and pushed in New York State to ban offshore drilling off the coast of New York. So we have to make sure that as that fund goes to important things, which I obviously support like all of my colleagues here, we have to make sure that that funding is not diverted like it often is by Congress. So my goal would be to put it into a lockbox to make sure that those funds are spent on the purpose of when this fund was created nearly 50 years ago.
Great, and thank you for also responding to the question as well. So So now let's move over to our final person on this question. So Asha Castleberry Hernandez, do you support the Land and Water Conservation Fund?
Yes, I do support the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It makes sense. It should be fully funded. As hopefully next year, your congressional representative, I would do anything I can to make sure that we secure that funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But again, we need that political courage in Congress to ensure that we have the person that can fight that. Unfortunately, many people don't. They don't have the political courage to do so, but we need to make sure we do that, especially for the fact that it improves the quality of living. And we have to protect those, especially the most vulnerable communities as far as facing with water crisis issues. So again, I do support the fund.
Great, thank you so much. So now we're gonna go over to our next question, again, 1 minute each. So the question is, what can the federal government do to support renewable energy and clean transportation? And this time we're going to start with Adam Schleifer, followed by Catherine Parker and Mondaire Jones. So let's begin. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, again, you're going to hear this a lot from me tonight. It's a carbon tax, because when we have a tax that forces, in economic terms, producers of fossil fuels to internalize the externalities, which is to say the pollution that they pollute, you will find that green, clean energy competes more effectively. This is what every serious scholar of this understands. It's again why the founder of the Columbia Earth Institute and the leading expert in environmental policy and law at Columbia University has endorsed my campaign, and that's what we need. We need a $40 per metric ton carbon tax so that it is not so fool's gold cheap to create these damaging environmental pollutants. Instead, folks will be incentivized once we have that cost to rely on green renewable energy. And we need tax incentives to support that, so that when we put in solar panels and when we use electric vehicles, we are supported as they compete in a more fair way with these outmoded and very dangerous technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. And Catherine Parker, can you now answer what do you think the federal government can do to support renewable energy and clean transportation?
So the federal government, when they create policy, it's often done by either using carrot or stick. And I think what Adam was just referring to, the carbon tax certainly is the stick that could be used on the fossil fuel industry. I would actually say before we get to the stick, what we need to do is remove the subsidies that we are still seeing on the fossil fuel industry. And in fact, if there's going to be, what should be subsidized and incentivized, that should be renewable energy. And we should really incentivize governments in every way, shape, and form to incorporate renewable energy into their portfolios. So for instance, Westchester County, we get money through what's called CDBG funds, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And if we had more funds that were directed towards doing our, say, affordable housing, where we're incorporating renewable energy specifically, I think that's a great way to help move us off of fossil fuels and onto renewable energy.
Thank you. Now, Mondaire Jones, could you weigh in? I think you're on mute still.
So I would love to. The UN IPCC report says that we've got 10 years left before global temperatures rise beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperature. And I fear that a carbon tax is way too modest a proposal for our avoiding climate catastrophe. There is a reason a Green New Deal, for example, makes no reference to a carbon tax. Instead of market incentives, we have to make sure that we are using federal mandate to decarbonize our economy. That is what is going to save the planet and future generations. And by the way, a carbon tax is regressive. Middle class and lower middle class people are going to have to pay more at the gas pump, and there's a reason that Exxon and other oil companies support a carbon tax. And it is why I support a Green New Deal, which is the only thing that comes close. The time is over for modest proposals. And so if your climate platform centers a carbon tax, then you are decades too late for what we're dealing with right now, where we only have 10 years left.
Thank you, Mon. All right.
Sorry, I had to mute everybody. For some reason, everybody on the meeting went unmuted and it was creating a lot of noise. So I just had to mute everybody and now we're back on track. Sorry.
No, no problem. I was about to say, just please everyone remember to mute your mics when others are speaking. So thank you, Mondaire. So Allison Fine, same question. Do you support the land and water conservation? I'm sorry, what can the federal government do to support renewable energy and clean transportation? As much as we'd love to hear more about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And Allison might be on mute still.
So, yes, now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so we start again. As I mentioned in my opening, we need to pivot the EPA to the Department of Ecological Stewardship. A large part of the workings of that department is going to be a Manhattan Project-size R&D effort to focus on the next generation of technology, the next generation after that. So for instance, moving beyond lithium battery technology, which is a chapter economically that we missed. Those products are manufactured in Germany and China. We could be focusing on sulfur battery, which potentially has longer, holds charge much longer. When those developments are created through the federal labs and the university systems, they're going to create enormous opportunity for entrepreneurship that can be spread then throughout the economy. And that is the best use of federal dollars for moving us forward to the next chapter.
Great, thank you so much. So now just to refresh everyone on the order, so we're now going to move over to Evelyn Farkas, Asha Castleberry-Hernandez, and then David Carlucci. So Evelyn, if you could take it away on what can the federal government do to support renewable energy and clean transportation? And just make sure you're...
The federal government can do what I mentioned in my opening statement, which is essentially realize the vision of the Green New Deal by pumping money into energy, moving energy from fossil fuels to renewables, and then also doing a transportation and infrastructure upgrade that's clean. What do I mean by that? So first of all, as Catherine mentioned, we need to remove the fossil fuel subsidies and provide subsidies and/or tax incentives to renewables like wind and solar. We need to work with the Bureau of Ocean Management to make sure that there's offshore territory available, land available for wind farms. We need to also then move to an energy grid that allows for buses and other electrification of vehicles, of transportation. And so across the board, it's a mix of incentives and funding. And frankly speaking, at the core of this will also be a tax overhaul. So we need to provide the revenue through a tax overhaul for this project. And that involves obviously creating new tax brackets and many other things.
Thank you. Asha Castleberry-Hernandez, you're next.
I pretty much agree on what most of my opponents are talking about, but I must say that we have to add on the fact that most of these renewable energy projects have to happen in the most vulnerable communities, where a lot of this is neglected, it's not even talked about. And how can we have equity in society or in our district if we're lacking if these type of issues are lacking in the most vulnerable communities, like what we see in Greenberg housing projects or in 100 College Arms in Terrytown, as well as East Post Road and South Lexington in White Plains. We have to make sure that federally, whatever's going on in terms of supporting renewable energy, that we have projects like wind power, electrical vehicles, as well as solar panels happening in the most vulnerable communities.
Thank you. All right, next we'll move on to David Carlucci. Make sure you're not muted.
Yes, thank you. And I agree with much of what my colleagues have said, that some of the ways that we can do this is one of the most important things is we have to make sure that we renew the residential renewable tax credit. And that will expire next year in 2021. So we have to make sure that that's fully funded so that homeowners can make those changes, like if it's geothermal or solar or even wind, that every opportunity we need to take it. We also now have to make sure that Congress is stepping up and funding giving funding to the states and localities, including our very own MTA. We know that they are experiencing a devastating blow. And if the federal government is not there to help, we could see many of the things that right now we take for granted go away. We're looking to expand access. We're looking for a one-seat ride from Rockland into New York City. We have to make sure that we pick up that fight and make sure that mass transit is funded. And that's the way that we'll have more accessible opportunities to get out of our cars and into mass transit.
Great, and let's conclude with David Buchwald.
Thank you. Well, we should begin with not just turning back the Trump administration effort to eliminate California's ability to have a separate, better fuel efficiency standard that New York follows. We should, in fact, make the California standard the national standard. That's part of my environmental platform. But we should also invest in mass transit, both Metro North, West and East of Hudson, but also our bus systems, including a true bus line across Rockland County and all the way to Port Chester. We should be sending someone to Congress like me who stood up for Tesla to make sure it could sell its electric vehicles here in New York State. And then beyond transportation, we should be making sure that we take the lessons that we've learned here locally, things like community choice aggregation, started here in Westchester, now starting to be used in Rockland, allows people to purchase to their communities 100% green energy. Has been very successful. It both lowers home electricity costs and improves the environment. We should have that be established as a national standard.
All right, thanks guys. So now we're gonna move to our lightning round questions. So like Julie mentioned before, these are meant to be nice, fast, quick responses. So please keep your answers to just one sentence. And I'm gonna keep it in alphabetical order for all of these to keep it nice and simple in terms of who's going first. So let's begin with David Buchwald. What's your favorite park?
My favorite park is Cranberry Lake. It's a Westchester County park in my assembly district, not too far from my home here in White Plains.
Nice. David Carlucci?
Rockland Lake State Park.
Great. Asha Castleberry Hernandez?
Garrison Park in Tarrytown.
Evelyn Farkas? Oh, you're on mute.
The Rockefeller Park, I've been going there ever since I was a child. It's like a big babysitter
Nice.
for everyone in my family.
Allison Fine?
Kingsland Point Park, right on the Hudson River, where I learned to swim in the Hudson River.
Oh, that's cool. Mondaire Jones?
Bear Mountain State Park. I used to go a lot growing up.
Catherine Parker? Make sure you're not on mute. Catherine, are you with us?
You're on mute, Catherine.
Did we lose Catherine, or is she just on mute?
Nope. Hold on.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Favorite park?
Favorite park. Well, as I was saying, it's hard for me to choose. I'm a big fan of parks. I attend parks every week. And lately I've been going to Rockefeller State Park as well. And I enjoy how it can connect to Stone Barns. That's also a very lovely walk.
Great. And Adam Schleifer?
I got to say it's a tie between Whippoorwill Park, which is in Newcastle, where I grew up, and I've been walking its trails for many years now, and probably Grand Teton National Park, because I have to brag and say I summited Grand Teton, and that was one of the thrills of my life.
I suppose we'll accept a tie. Okay, so this is actually my favorite lightning round one. Again, alphabetical order. Do you compost? David Buchwald.
We do not in my family, though we do recycle extensively. Thank you.
Great. David Carlucci.
I would say that I've started to, but I have not done it successfully. I'm doing it with my kids. We have a lot of food scraps, and so I'm starting to, and hopefully we can figure it out.
Ashel Castleberry Hernandez.
I'm starting to too. I also have kids, and we're trying to figure it out as well.
Great. Evelyn Farkas. Yep, you're on mute.
I'm a heavy and finicky recycler, but I live in an apartment building, so I don't compost. Maybe I can in an apartment building, but I also don't create a lot of extra scraps because I'm sort of the child of immigrants, so we don't throw food out.
All right, Allison Fine.
Yes, we've been composting for a while, and we have a lot to compost now, given that we are home with 5 people and having every single meal here. So doing our part.
Mondaire Jones.
I recycle extensively, but in the past I've been unsuccessful and discouraged at the task of composting, but I need to do better.
Catherine Parker.
We have been composting for many years, and my kids are very good at it. And they know that I will fish through the garbage and reprimand them if something has been thrown out that didn't need to go into the waste stream.
Children are the future. Adam Schleifer.
Very recently, I fell off the composting wagon, but I have a decade-long history of composting, and I will warn those who want to try, make sure you take out the stuff from the compost bin regularly, or you'll get a fungal horticulture garden in your compost bin.
Oh, that's good to know. Okay, so next lightning round question. When you're not in quarantine, do you take mass transit? David Buchwald?
Well, right now, my day job has me going up to Albany, and unfortunately, there's not a direct route from White Plains to Albany, but I used to be a Metro North rider on a regular basis and member and then chairman of the Metro North Railroad Community Council.
Gotcha. All right, David Carlucci?
Yeah, where I live in Rockland County, it's really not much of an option. There are just a few options, and this is one of the big issues. That's why we need high speed, we need rail across the Tappan Zee Bridge. We need to have a 1-seat ride to New York City, and we need to have more bus options in Rockland and throughout Westchester as well.
Great. Asha Castleberry Hernandez?
I do take, the White Plains, train system as well as Hartsdale area, and been for many years for the Beeline bus. So, when I get a chance, I like to ride a bike.
Nice. All right, Evelyn Farkas.
So I'm an avid fan of public transportation. You can read, you can do all kinds of things, and it's good for the environment. My last 4 years living in Washington, working for the federal government, I did not own a car. And my travel back and forth between New York and Washington, which of course has been the last 20 years of my life, has been conducted massively, so substantially by train, although some car here and there, carpooling with family.
Gotcha.
And now, of course, I have to drive a bit, but before COVID.
Right.
I live in South Nyack, and in most parts of Rockland County, you have to take a car or take a bus to get into the city or to get to Westchester for that matter, unfortunately, which is why I've really centered a 1-seat train into the city and into Westchester. It's something I'm fighting for. I think it could be one aspect, one feature of a Green New Deal as implemented in New York's 17th Congressional District. But when I'm in Westchester and I'm going into the city, I absolutely take the Metro North.
Gotcha. Okay. Catherine Parker?
Yes, absolutely. And let me say that if elected, I will be taking mass transit and not flying to Washington, D.C. I mean, I think what we're seeing now with the climate crisis is that we really can't ignore the air industry and the pollution that creates. And I also, by the way, drive a Chevy.
Lightning round.
Okay, yeah.
All right, thank you. Adam Schleifer?
Very quickly, for marital domestic harmony, I have to add that my other favorite park is Glazer Arboretum in Chappaqua, because as my wife reminds, we got engaged there. That was a big mistake for me to leave that out. And it shows how much I love that park too, and my wife. Okay, I love mass transit. I've taken it for the many times I've lived in Westchester, commuting down to my job as a consumer protection regulator for Governor Cuomo in New York. I took the Metro North every day. I love that sound of the whirring as it pulls into the station, and I love sitting on that train. So yes, I'm a big fan of mass transit and an avid user of that.
Gotcha. All right. So now, again, lightning round. This one is a super easy one to keep short. So,
Wait. I didn't answer the last question.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
I've been working from home for a very long time, but we also have the lovely benefit of living a few blocks from the Phillips Manor train station here. And so we always take the train into the city. And I'll say one of the very loveliest things about the isolation period is the enormous number of people out walking in the streets. And I hope we can keep that going.
Great. Sorry about that, Allison. Did I miss anyone else? Just to make sure we're good. Okay, great. All right. So now, lightning round. This is a super easy one to do as a yes or no. So, should the U.S. rejoin the Paris Accord? David Buchwald.
Yes.
David Carlucci.
Yes.
Asha Castelberry Hernandez.
Yes.
Evelyn Farquez. Oh, you might be on mute.
Yes, but it's not sufficient.
Allison Fine.
Yes.
Mondaire Jones.
Emphatically yes.
Catherine Parker.
Absolutely.
And Adam Schleifer.
Not should, must. It must, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So one of our candidates has some time constraints. I am told that Mondaire Jones has to leave a little early today. So I would like to give him an opportunity to just give his closing remarks now before we move to our next question. And then Mondaire, if we can still squeeze in the question while you're here, I'll bump you up. So just to be on the safe side with time.
Yeah, I want to start by apologizing because I was told by this union who I'm interviewing with that there was literally no other time at which I can do that interview. And I'm feeling really, really bad about it, frankly. But thank you for the opportunity to give a closing statement and hopefully to answer another question before I have to hop off. I want to just thank everyone again for joining. I know that we're in the midst of something that we never anticipated. But when we get through this, because we will get through this, because we're strong and we're resilient, and I'm already seeing the mutual aid that myself and other candidates and other people all on this call have been facilitating even to help us rise above these circumstances and get through it. We are going to have to remember that before COVID happened, we were facing another existential crisis known as climate catastrophe. And we have got to elect someone to Congress who understands the urgency of this moment in American history, who understands that we've only got 10 years left before irreparable harm is done to the planet, and who understands that we need to mobilize the federal government in an unprecedented large-scale way, not even imaginable even a few decades ago. And we also have to work in concert with our foreign actors like China and India, huge emitters. And that person, someone who makes sure that a Green New Deal is his or her number one priority, is going to be the person who we absolutely need as a 17th Congressional District.
Thank you, Mondaire. So now we're going to move to our third question. We'll start with Mondaire, just to give him a shot to get one more in there before he has to sign off. So our next question is, what will you do to assure that America's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is one that also advances our country's desperate need to establish more sustainable policies around energy, water resources, and water ecosystems? Mondaire, can you begin?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that question because I've been thinking a lot about it. There are going to be so many, we know that tens of millions of people are already unemployed as a result of this pandemic. And as I think about the silver linings, because I do try to be optimistic about every scenario, I think to myself, here's an opportunity to use something like a Green New Deal to create jobs. And these should be green jobs that pay great wages and that are helpful at decarbonizing our economy, to making sure that we can ensure a livable future for ourselves and for the people who come after us. And so for me, it's investing in our transportation infrastructure. For example, I mentioned in Rockland how that's possible. And I mentioned also light rail, which we used to have in Peekskill and in Ossining. We need that all throughout our district and frankly, all throughout this country. But we also need to make sure that we are improving our grid, that we are transitioning to renewable resources. When I think about something like Indian Point Power Plant, I think of the fact that here's an opportunity to make sure that we invest more in solar and in wind, and to do it safely and to do it with some sanity. And that's how we're gonna, I think, come out of this better than we were before.
Thanks, Mondaire. Okay, so now we'll go to Adam Schleifer, followed by Catherine Parker. Same question. Oh, Adam, you're on mute.
I apologize. You cut off for one small part of the first. Can you quickly repeat it? Because I didn't hear the one piece of the first part of it.
No problem. What will you do to assure that America's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is one that also advances our country's desperate need to establish more sustainable policies around energy, water resources, and water ecosystems?
Sure. Thank you. It's a great question, and one I've been thinking a lot about. I wrote an op-ed on that, partly in the Journal News, lowhud.com, a few weeks ago. The bottom line is we are seeing ourselves rise to this national moment and flex our policy muscles. And we're agile and we're data-driven and we're pragmatic and we're provisional right now. And those are good things. And when I say we, I mean the great lesson in leadership that Governor Cuomo and Governor Newsom and others are doing, not what we're seeing in the White House. But what we're seeing is a few things that we need to emphasize. One, the graphs, which tell a beautiful story. We stopped driving around. The earth is breathing more deeply right now. That's an image and a fact that we need to get out there to explain to people. We need to say, you know what? We have the power to face down our challenges. However many people are going to die tragically from coronavirus, orders of magnitude more, unfortunately, will die from unabated climate change. However much money we are losing, orders of magnitude more will be lost when every half mile of the seashore right now around the globe is underwater. So we need to understand now we have the power. We're doing things. We just passed a $2 trillion deal. We need to flex those same muscles. We have the ability, and that's our next task right after we get out of this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Catherine Parker?
Yeah, so I've been saying for a long time that climate change is at the intersection with social justice and healthcare and all those issues. So if we're talking about COVID, you know, one of the things that we have seen is that there is certainly an issue of injustice with COVID. We have people that are in cities that are, you know, have a much higher fatality rate. And frankly, it goes along with the fact that health is not as good in those areas. And it reminds me of legislation that I worked on in my first term at the Board of Legislators to eliminate number 4 and 6 heating oil, the particulate matter. We've been talking a lot about particulate matter when it comes to COVID, but 4 and 6, when we passed that legislation, we saw studies that showed the instances of hospitalizations and asthma in communities of color because they had more of this dirty oil that that you know certainly made things worse for them.
Thank you. All right, next we'll move to Allison Fine, and then Evelyn Farkas will follow.
So one of my biggest fears coming out of this dreadful, dreadful moment is that people will think it's okay to go back to normal. Going back to normal is really bad. Normal wasn't good, but it's very difficult to rebend the arc of history and progress in a different direction, but that's what we would have to do. We need, of course, a big governmental effort on this, but we also need a different kind of leadership. We need leadership that understands that this is intersectional, that this is going to involve culture and social and the nonprofit sector and the private sector all working together. They need to be incentivized. They need to be coordinated. There needs to be a kind of leadership that is listening, right? We so often know, like with Indian Point right now, the government is working so hard to make sure we have little tiny citizen input and that the answer is we'll take it under advisement. And the answer from public officials and leaders should be from this moment forward, tell me more. Tell me more, tell me your ideas, tell me where you want us to go. That's us in our best strengths, and that's the kind of leadership that we need in this moment.
Thanks, Allison. All right, next up we have Evelyn Farkas.
So I have worked as a servant or served in the federal government for 2 decades. And the only way I could do it was to be an optimist, to believe that in Congress and in the executive branch, we could use the government to achieve good for people, for Americans. And I really believe that the silver lining coming out of this horrible pandemic, which also was to some extent needless in terms of how it's impacted the United States. The silver lining is that everybody understands now that we need government at all levels. We need competent government to help us. And so I think it does provide the opportunity for what I talked about earlier, this Green New Deal, the actualization, the visualization, the realization of the Green New Deal. And we can provide the funding for that, as I said, through tax reform, which will also help in healthcare and other areas. But I really believe that the opportunity is there now for the federal government, because people can see for their own eyes how much they need the government. So I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you. Asha Castleberry-Hernandez is next. And the question again, just to remind everyone, is what will you do to assure America's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is one that also advances the country's need for more sustainable policies. More sustainable policies.
The pandemic highlighted that what we've seen at the most vulnerable communities have been impacted, which we're talking about the working class, the essential workers. And now we can use this time not only to understand those issues, but help rebuild our district to the fact that allow them to shape policy. The ones that were highly impacted by the pandemic should be the ones to voice what we should do moving forward for our future. So in terms of just like as mentioned before, the intersection between the economics as well as the healthcare issue and the environment, we need to hear from those that have been at a disadvantage and be able to shape policy and create a bottom-top approach from local all the way up to federal to influence policy so we can be effective moving forward in the future. And we have to build an effective coalition. We don't have time for lip service. We don't have time for photo op. We need leaders that are willing to walk into these communities that need a voice and better shape policy.
Great, thanks so much, David Carlucci. Oh, David, make sure you're not on mute.
Yeah, we have a real opportunity here that as we are starting to think about how we reopen, we have to reimagine what our economy looks like, from everything from how we get to work, instituting more ways to telecommute to get people out of their vehicles, to how we invest in infrastructure and transportation. As we are asking and giving a helping hand to businesses, we should also be looking at incentivizing them and pushing them that as they're investing, to invest in renewable energy and less wasteful measures that they're taking. I think the silver lining is that unfortunately, given this devastation from something that really crept up on us, we've been screaming from the top of our lungs, all of the candidates that I'm joined with and all of the people on this line, about how much of a disaster climate change will be going unchecked. So I think this is a wake-up call. It's shaken society, and it shows that if we're caught flat-footed, if we're caught off guard, that the repercussions could be devastating. So I think that we have to make sure that as we are investing in state, local governments and with individuals, at every opportunity, we take that to reinvest and reimagine the way that our economy and our society can function. So I think we have great opportunities.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go to David Buchwald.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's clear that the argument for environmental justice is as strong now as it's ever been. I'm proud to have been a co-sponsor of New York's version of the Green New Deal, the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act that is now law, signed by Governor Cuomo this past year. And I really believe that we need to make sure that we are learning the lessons from this. Obviously, on the energy and water front, this question asked, but also the air pollution front, which directly impacts folks who come down with COVID-19. We have to make sure we make investments in our future so that we don't just return to the economy of old. So we should be doing things like making sure there's a robust charging station set up. We should be making sure that we are not doing what the Trump administration is doing during this pandemic of finalizing fuel efficiency rollbacks, of lifting restrictions on mercury emissions. We have to make sure that we have an economy that really works for all.
All right, thanks so much, guys. So now we're going to move to audience questions. So Julie, if you want to read our first audience question, and then I'll help.
And just a reminder, anyone who wants to ask a question, please put into the chat and direct your question to the cleverly marked questions option. The first question we have is, do you support the use and expansion of biofuels as a transition to a clean energy future?
All right, great. Let's start with Evelyn Farkas.
I personally am in favor of renewable energy, solar and wind, so I'm not advocating for biofuels per se.
Thank you. Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
I'm also in favor of renewable energy, solar panels, wind power. So yes.
Thank you. David Carlucci. Yep, David.
Yeah, we've seen that a focus on biofuels could have adverse effects, and that the focus needs to be on renewable energy, and that needs to be the focus.
David Buchwald.
In the past, I think something like ethanol and otherwise has been a political power play, not based on where we are environmentally. And now that we're at the point where we can have a lot more truly clean energy, that's really where our focus should be, both transportation-wise, but also in terms of how we power our homes and businesses.
Allison Fine.
I worry about anything that's going to distract us from renewables, but I also worry about not leaning hard enough into future generations of different kinds of energy that we haven't yet thought of.
Catherine Parker.
Yeah, so I actually have done a little bit of study into biofuels. I remember when there was an algae plant that was developed in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And, I thought that sounded interesting. And if that gets us off of fossil fuels, great. But, it went belly up. It wasn't sustainable and frankly, very expensive. And so I think what we're seeing is water, wind, solar. That's really where that's cheap energy, really, really cheap energy. And we just need to keep investing in that. And what we also need to invest in is the distribution grid, because it really, at the end of the day, it's great to have, offshore wind, but we have to make sure that we can get that to all areas of New York. And same with water. We have to make sure that hydro energy can come down to our denser populated areas in the southern part of the state.
Thank you. And Adam Schleifer. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, there I go. So I think, as with everything, hopefully when I'm in Congress, I let the science drive the policy, not the ideology. And so my view is, like many here, I favor pure renewables. I drove an electric car, I'm proud to say, which was powered by the solar panels on my roof. And that's where we need to be focusing. But I'm open-minded to the possibility that there could be a form of biofuel-based liquid fuel, for example, that's an improvement on our existing class of fossil fuels for something like air travel. For example, it is not an easy technological problem how to achieve aerodynamic lift in an effective way without some form of liquid fuel. So I'm open-minded for limited uses for biofuels that could be an incremental improvement over fossil fuels, while not letting Exxon and Shell and those other companies greenwash us and distract us from the real task at hand, which is moving to a purely renewable energy future.
Great. And then Julie, do you want to give us our next audience question?
Sure. Are you satisfied with the EPA's recent decision on the Hudson River PCB cleanup, or do you think more needs to be done?
Good question. All right, so let's start with Allison Fine.
There's certainly more to be done. The PCBs aren't all cleaned up. As I mentioned previously, I grew up swimming in that river before it was cleaned at all. So I'm delighted that it's cleaner than it was, but we still have work to do on it. You look confused. Am I answering the wrong question?
Oh, no, you're doing great.
Oh. I look confused, I'm sorry. And the good news, though, is with the shutdown of Indian Point, the river will get demonstrably cleaner as well. And again, just as with the people walking, one of the uplifting parts of the shutdown has been that we see nature renewing itself as it should, and the resilience of nature in real time is encouraging for what we need to do in the future.
Great, thanks so much. And sorry about that. David Buchwald, do you want to go from here?
Sure. No, I do not think that GE has been held to sufficient account when it comes to the release and then cleanup of PCBs, and I would urge hopefully new administration to totally re-examine the EPA's approach, and more broadly, the EPA has not been basing its decisions, I think, on science, which is most important. But more broadly, I've been pleased to work on protecting the Hudson River with our area's congressional delegation, standing up against the idea of turning the Hudson into a parking lot for oil barges. I've, in the state assembly, successfully enacted legislation to help clean up tributaries of the Hudson, the Cantico and Sawmill rivers, as well as separately the Bronx River. And I'm someone who's absolutely stood for making sure that the Hudson River and more broadly our waterways are as clean as possible. And I really feel that the PCB issue is just the issue. Thank you.
Gotcha, thanks so much. All right, Catherine Parker.
Sure. Well, this is where being an elected official, you can go back and check my record. So as a legislator and former chair of the Environment Committee for Westchester County, I actually brought forth a resolution in support of keeping the permit open when GE was still in the throes of doing the cleanup, because we knew that we were already seeing test results that showed that, as we know, water flows south, and that there was further damage than just the immediate field that they were responsible for. And so we tried to keep that permit open. Our state, in fact, was in charge of the administration of that permit. And it was very disappointing that our state did not make sure that the equipment and everything was going to stay there for a phase 2 of that project. So a little disappointing.
David Carlucci. Oh, David, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Yes, this has been very disappointing. I feel the EPA has let GE off the hook. It's been proven they've contaminated the Hudson River with PCBs. That's a proven fact. They said they would clean up the Hudson River. It was then seen that the contamination was far worse. The Hudson River is the largest Superfund site in the nation. And we have to make sure that the mistake that GE made, that they're held accountable for it. I joined state senators a few years back and signed on to a letter urging GE to do the right thing, as well as urging the EPA to hold GE accountable. I've been teaming up with the Ossining School District and with Riverkeeper, and we've been testing the Hudson River on an ongoing basis because we want to reopen a beach at Ossining. We feel that the river belongs to the people of New York State and this country. So it's a shame. And once I'm in Congress, I'll do everything I can to hold them accountable and hold everyone that's done detrimental things to the Hudson accountable.
Thanks, David. Adam Schleifer.
Yes, so we have, the federal government has not done enough. They let us down on this. And that's because elections have consequences. And when you put a president in the White House who doesn't understand or respect science, who oversees his sycophants at the EPA who neither understand nor respect science, we have people who do as the EPA did here and let us down and gave a certificate of completion to GE when in fact the work hasn't been done. And I commend Governor Cuomo and the Riverkeeper and many folks active with the Riverkeeper who are on this call for sounding the alarm on that and continuing the work. And you can believe that when I'm in Congress next year, I will use every shred and fiber of the oversight power of Congress to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, because we've been letting our folks down too long on the banks of the Hudson River, whether it's the NRC with Indian Point admitting with the OIG report just this past winter that they had faulty assumptions when they let a gas pipeline go underneath a nuclear power plant on an earthquake fault, and with this GE thing. Enough is enough. We need to protect our people and have the federal government stand up and do its job and respect science. Thank you.
Thank you. Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
Yes, this issue is personal to me. I grew up right next to the Hudson River for 18 years. So just like Allison, I've actually swam in the Hudson River. I mentioned before to you, I've visited the area very close up in Pearson Park. So better quality of the Hudson River means a lot to me. In fact, we have a long way to go. So I would definitely question, the EPA standard. We definitely need to pressure the administration to ensure that we have better standards in place. And also we need to make sure that they're better educated on what is like as far as the quality of the Hudson River. The Hudson River still has a long way to go as far as improving quality. And in order to do that, we definitely not only need to get with organizations like that are part of this effort, but also the people that live below in the valley along the Hudson River to be part of that dialogue, be part of that policy discussion to better implement a better standard for the Hudson River.
Thank you. And now to close, Evelyn Farkas.
Yeah, so obviously we have a massive problem with oversight and pollution, specifically pollution oversight. So the decision with regard to the PCBs is not sufficient. Everybody knows that, but there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that EPA is not, first of all, not conducting its work, not sufficiently empowered to do its work. And in fact, this administration is taking advantage of the pandemic to actually loosen restrictions right now. So the federal government is falling down on the job, but Congress also needs to hold EPA accountable and give EPA the tools that it requires in order to do its job. So I also swam in the Hudson, but only in the 70s, not in the 80s. And I would say that we need to do much more to clean up the Hudson, and the corporations need to help. We also need to work on the tributaries. I mean, the Sparkle Creek is one of the most, if not the most polluted tributary, of the Hudson River. So it's not just about the river itself, but it's around the surrounding area as well. But there is a big role for the federal government, and we need a renewed EPA to take action here.
Thanks, Evelyn. All right, we're going to go to another audience question if Julie wants to read one.
We're going to make the rest, any questions we can get in, we're going to make them 30-second answers in an effort to try and get some more audience questions. If elected, what will be the first piece of environmental legislation you will either co-sponsor or propose?
David Buchwald. Update.
The one I'd like to introduce would be to allow community choice aggregation across the entire country, meaning allow communities to purchase their collective energy, and hopefully in a 100% green way. I think that's something that we should be a leader on, and the representative of the 17th Congressional District should lead on based on Westchester and Rockland's lead already.
Thank you. David Carlucci.
Yeah, there's many bills and many issues, but I think the first one that I would push would be to co-sponsor the Green New Deal. I think that would be the biggest and boldest change that we can make in our policy in the United States. So that would be the first piece of legislation.
Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
I would support the Green New Deal, but I would support also another legislation that's really focused on the water crisis issue. I think that water degradation is a real big concern, especially in places like Rockland County, and it's definitely impacting many of those. And there's an inequality that's involved in the water crisis issue as well. So we definitely need someone who can champion this issue, be able to tackle it. And I believe that not only we'll be able to tackle it at home, but also be able to build a coalition going across the nationwide, as we're watching, the water crisis issue in Newark as well as Flint, Michigan. So we definitely need to target or address that issue first.
Thank you. Evelyn Farkas.
So I'll use my background in national security to rally votes to implement the Green New Deal. And what do I mean by that? I think that if you explain to the American people and you explain to lawmakers, including those across the aisle, that this is not only, it's a national security issue, it's an environmental security issue, it's a national security issue, it's a health security issue, it's a job security issue, it's a social security issue. We need to address global climate change and the crisis that we're in right now from that perspective. Through that lens, I will champion legislation that will achieve everything that's in the Green New Deal, also in a way that's socially responsible, socially just, the way that Governor Inslee has laid out in his plan.
Thank you. Allison Fine.
A Green New Deal that includes a Manhattan Project size R&D effort that is activated through the national labs and university systems in the country.
Great. Catherine Parker.
So like everybody else, New Deal, I think it would be a great first step. And if we were lucky enough that that's already like on everybody's front and center, and we have to go to like what the next thing would be, I'd like to see across the country do what New York State has done, which is ban fracking. And I'd like to see that take place within 5 years out of the policy is passed.
Gotcha. And Adam Schleifer.
Yeah, a bold Green New Deal, and my vision of my bold Green New Deal has two primary parts: a carbon tax, which, by the way, and here's where I differ slightly with Allison, I don't think we should be trying to fund research only through the public funding. We should incentivize all the genius of the private sector to innovate on its own, as it always does, by making the incentives aligned, and you do that through a carbon tax. That's its beauty. Number two, a national green 21st century infrastructure core as part of a national service plan, so that everybody in this country meets everybody else in this country, rolls up their sleeves, works, and gets free education for the years they work developing a green 21st century infrastructure.
Wait, I feel like I need to respond to that.
Sure, you can have 15 seconds.
15 seconds. The role of government R&D is to spur technology transfer into the private sector. That's how we create innovations. That's how we create new businesses and new jobs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, you have another question for us?
I do. This one won't be controversial at all.
Good.
Do you actually no? I'm going to ask one that I have myself. But this is a lightning round question. Do you use reusable bags when you go shopping?
It's a very Julie question. Okay, Adam Schleifer.
Yes, I do. And that's a big point of pride in my household and my family. The worst day is
a yes or no question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yes.
Thanks, Julie. Catherine Parker.
Yes, have been for years.
Allison Fine.
Yes.
Evelyn Farkas. Oh, you're on mute.
Absolutely. Yes.
Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
Yes, absolutely.
David Carlucci.
Yes, here's mine right here.
Individual. And David Buchwald.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. For many of you who know, I wrote several versions of the plastic bag law.
Can I tell you that Trader Joe's, last time I went there during Corona, they made me put mine back in the car.
Yeah, there's a grocery store that's doing some funny things right now. Okay, this one in fact is something to think about. So, do you support the closure of Indian Point by 2021, or would you like Unit 3 to stay on for at least a period of time, given that it is fossil, it doesn't have any emissions associated with it?
All right, let's start with Allison Fine.
I think the first question really is if we're really confident that Holtec is the right contractor on this. And I actually would rather have another round of bids on that contract, because I'm not convinced that they are capable of doing this in a safe way. You only have one shot to shut it down. And so I want to do this right, the one time that we're going to do it. And I think that we need to make sure that we have the very best contractor in place to do that.
Thanks, Allison. Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
This issue is personal to me. I used to actually provide security at the Indian Point and New York National Guard. And so with that being said, I definitely support the shutdown as soon as possible by 2021. That is what the people want, especially nearby in Peekskill. For many years, many people work there, and they do not want it open. So we need to close as soon as possible. It is a national security threat, and it's right about now, no one wants it open.
David Carlucci.
Yeah, I agree with what the two previous speakers said, that first, very concerned about Holtec, but I wanted to see these reactors close as soon as possible. I think we have to make sure we do our due diligence in that the decommissioning, I feel that some people might have let their guard down now, but this is the most dangerous time. But it's no reason to stop the reactors, shut them down, and we need to make sure that it's a safe decommissioning. When I was the town clerk, I distributed potassium iodide It's a dangerous situation. It will continue to be, so we have to make sure it's decommissioned appropriately.
Thank you. Catherine Parker?
Just am I on mute?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, good. So let's start first with the premise that I think the person that submitted the question was kind of implying that nuclear energy is clean energy. And I would say first, I beg to differ, because there are elements that are mined that are definitely toxic elements, and I do not see it as a clean energy. And I think the other piece of that, and another reason why I think that it absolutely has to be closed, is because it's at the end of its lifespan. You know, nuclear power plants, to do them new, they're very expensive, and other countries that have tried to invest heavily are realizing that that was probably the wrong way to go. Renewable energy.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you, though. Evelyn Farkas?
So I believe we should stay on track. We should keep on the schedule, but we need a tremendous overhaul of how the facility is being closed, how the second reactor is being closed right now within days, and then of course the third one. We need an oversight mechanism that includes robust federal oversight. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission must be made to exercise more authority, whether by law or by regulation. There should likely be also another oversight mechanism on top of that, because we need active congressional involvement that coordinates with state and local officials so that the closure is clean, environmentally sustainable, and provides a glide path to an economic future for the community.
Gotcha. David Buchwald?
I agree. The Indian Point nuclear reactors would not have been granted a renewal of their relicensing if it was on an extended period of time. The only way they were temporarily renewed was with the decommissioning in place. So we should stick to that. More broadly, it's important for the area that we transition to a post-Indian Point setup. I think that's important for reusing the land in the area. I do agree with Allison that Holtec is a significant concern. At the same time, it's also a concern there's a gas pipeline running right through the Indian Point nuclear facility, and that running there is something that I'm proud to work with Assemblywoman Cindy Galiff and colleagues on.
Thank you. And now Adam Schleifer.
Yeah, I supported shutdown. It's an intolerable risk. And unfortunately, as the OIG found recently, the basic scientific assumptions were faulty when the review was done. We need to exercise congressional oversight and get our arms around this and learn from this mistake so we don't make these mistakes in the future. And I also commend Congresswoman Lowy, because as others have recognized, it does leave a fiscal and economic hole in the communities that service that plant and work there. And so she has taken bold steps to help mitigate that economic consequence, and we need to continue to be mindful of that as well.
Gotcha. Julie, do we have another audience question? Or, oh, actually, you know what? Let's move to closing statements. Does that work, Julie?
Yes, I think we're out of time.
We're out of time. All right. So let's just go in alphabetical order to close. David Buchwald.
Well, thank you again, Danielle, for moderating, and to the league and all the co-sponsors for this forum, and to everyone who's watching and listening. This is an extremely important topic. The environment is something that's near and dear to my heart, both based on my science background and just being a member of the community here. I've learned a lot in this forum. If you want to learn more about me and my environmental platform, go to davidbuchwaldforcongress.com. Lead news release based on yesterday being Earth Day, and happy 50th anniversary of Earth Day to everyone. But I really feel that there is a difference between the two state legislators in this race. You can go with somebody who has a record of actually getting things done on the environment and being a leader. 100% means 100% with me. You can also go with someone like me who you know is a member of the community. I was very interested to learn that Ms. Farkas lives in an apartment. She claims to live at her parents' home when it's convenient for running for office purposes. But in any case, in the meantime, I'm someone that you can rely on to actually get the job done. Thank you.
Okay. David Carlucci.
Well, thank you to all the participants tonight and to the sponsors of this forum. It's such an important issue, and particularly when we're dealing with the COVID crisis, it's so important that we don't forget about the crisis, the looming crisis of climate change. I've been honored to have be able to co-sponsor the Climate Leadership Protection Act, to be the sponsor of the Green Amendment, which is legislation that would change the state constitution to have words in the Constitution to make sure that we're guaranteed the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. We need to make sure that whoever succeeds Congresswoman Lowy is following in her footsteps in that tenacity to make sure that climate change is a top issue. And I'm going to make sure that I do whatever I can, that we push back against polluters, that we reimagine our economy and our society so that our children have a future in the environment, in making sure that it's healthy, safe, and a great place to live. So thank you for having us tonight, and look forward to serving you in the future. Again, I'm David Carlucci, and it'll be an honor and a privilege to serve you. Thank you.
All right, Asha Castleberry Hernandez.
Thank you for having me tonight. Again, the environment is very important to me, especially when you look at two important things that you need moving forward to beyond Neil Lowy's as Neil Lowy's successor. You need someone with experiences, and you need someone who needs to tackle these inequities. Experiences, as mentioned before, I do have also a proven record. I have worked with DOD, making sure that we have supported Go Green projects like wind power at military installations. I have an extensive record working at the United Nations supporting sustainable development goals, Millennium Development Goals, making sure that we influence policy at Copenhagen and also in Rio Treaty. So you need someone with experiences. The coronavirus is definitely a reminder of us that we can't have someone who is not ready. We need someone who has the political courage to tackle these challenges, especially those that have been ignored. So I must say that this is very important moving forward, that we have everybody rise above the environmental issues and not leave those that have been fallen behind, that have been greatly impacted, and we are seeing this definitely under the coronavirus. Thank you.
Great, Evelyn Farkas, and if you want to take an extra 10 seconds since you were singled out before, go ahead.
I don't really know what that comment was about, so I'll just leave it for now. So I am really thankful that you organized this forum so that we could focus exclusively on the climate crisis, because as I said, it's the #1 issue in my platform. And I am a 30-year professional in my field, and the last 20 years was in the federal government, with the exception of the last few years working for MSNBC, was in the federal government, basically drafting and passing legislation at the federal level or making policy at the federal level. I know how to get things done through the federal government, through Congress, and I will do it first and foremost. My #1 plan, as I said, is the climate crisis. Yesterday, I hosted Maureen Ramo, Dr. Ramo, who is one of our preeminent scientists who is at the Lamont Doherty Center, Columbia's Lamont Doherty Center in Rockland, and she talked about flattening the curve for climate change. So she said, what we've learned from this COVID crisis is that we can all work together to tackle a huge problem. So let's flatten the climate crisis curve. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Fine.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I really want to acknowledge the enormous amount of pain that's in this community, in every community around the world right now. People are afraid, people are sick, people are hungry. And we have an enormous amount of work to get out of this crisis. We can't assume we're going to get out of it. We're going to have to fight our way out of it. And in order to do that, we need leaders who have a different set of skills than business as usual government and political leaders. This is a time for people who begin by listening and then lead into connecting people to one another and to resources, people who can hold the present pain and the promise of the future together at the same time and can move us forward in ways that are connecting inside of government, outside to people, communities, across sectors, across the world. That's what I've done in my career, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing for this district.
Thanks, Allison. Now we'll move to Catherine Parker.
Yes, thank you for having this. And I saw a name that came up as one of the people watching, Bob Sloss. And You know, when I announced my candidacy, I did so at his passive house. And the reason why I did that was because I felt that this was a way of just talking about how we all need to be looking at how we can all get off fossil fuels, and there is money to be saved there. Talking about it in terms of coronavirus, certainly we're seeing that this country is taking on the coronavirus as if it's the enemy and we're fighting a war. And as I have been saying during the course of this campaign, we need to be fighting climate change as a war, because it's going to take all our departments, all of our different aspects of our society to come together to turn the tide on this and to get us out to the other side. So thanks for listening, and I have enjoyed this very much.
Thank you. And to close, Adam Schleifer.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much to all of you who took times out of your difficult days and these difficult times to come hear all of our vision. This is the most democratic form of participation in democracy. This is directly us to you, and you can compare all of our visions, and I'm so glad you've done so. I have devoted much of my career to fighting for this planet and ensuring that my first child, who's being born this summer, and his grandchildren and so on can inherit a healthy and habitable planet. I've done that by prosecuting folks who conspire to violate our Clean Air Act as a federal prosecutor, prosecuting folks who smuggled an endangered species, prosecuting someone who tried to destroy Joshua Tree National Park, but also in dealing with the experts, learning the science, taking time to read books. I can commend many of you, More from Less by Andrew McAfee, who explains the need for a carbon tax, and others. I've sat down with the experts. That's why they endorse me. That's why Professor Michael Gerard of the Columbia Earth Institute endorsed me just this week on Earth Day, because I know what this takes. I'm ready to do it. There is no higher calling, and I can't wait to do it for you in Congress next year. Thank you very much.
Great. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Again, I especially want to thank all of our candidates and Danielle for moderating this evening. I think this all went very well. We hope you learned a few new things about the environment and importantly about the candidates. If you tuned in late or you want to rewatch, this video will also be on our Facebook page at facebook.com/NYLCV. Most important, be sure to vote. The election will be held on June 23rd. Governor Cuomo signed an executive order this week ordering ballots be automatically mailed to all voters for the primary election, so make sure to check your mail. We all, of course, I personally like to go to the ballot. I miss the lever, but it's still great that we have this option given this new public health crisis.
He didn't sign an executive agreement, that executive order. That was just a report.
Okay. Well, we're expecting there to be an executive order to make that happen.
Okay.
You can also follow us on @NYLCV on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram for updates on this and other news related to this. And of course, if you're not on our email list, please sign up at www.nylcv.org. Thank you, and all be well and stay healthy.
Thank you for having us.